viewing places that supposedly had something going on well. I've worked really extensively with Andre Bailey here at the Central Florida Commission on Homelessness when that was started. And so my background is trying to find things that work and what the best way is to do different things. So to apply that to your question, my opinion is not very popular. First thing is, our system is completely broken. And the reason I say our system is completely broken is it's very difficult for nonprofits to truly work together when they're competing for the same grant dollars. That's one issue I can talk about. I mean, I can go on and on, but within the system that we currently have, which is that's basically what we have to talk about, because we can't change the continuums of care nationwide and how NOPA is running, all those things that really need to be fixed. What I found in every city that had success doing anything, the number one thing was a good public relations campaign to start with. That was across the board, every city that I went to that had major success in any area. It was because the marketing behind that started it all. And so I think that's something that's overlooked by most of the communities, is how important that is. The second thing is having a point person on homelessness in your community. Those two things were the two factors that made programs successful all throughout the United States.
I can understand that too. Big things that a lot of people I didn't know is when they get SNAP benefits, that's good for food, but it's not good for hygiene supplies. So then a lot of times people are going without soap or basic needs. So, a lot of things, we take for granted. We get a shower every day, we clean every day. Homeless don't. And, that restricts them in a lot of other ways. It's hard to get a job. It's hard to get, friends. It's hard to get anything. You see your family if you're not, hygienic. So it all kind of starts there, especially, that's my kind of coming from where I'm coming from right now. But there's a lot of things on that level, just basic human needs that the homeless have that are not being met.
The challenge I see most often, of course, is I work for iDignity, so we assist with identification documents. And that's one of those things, Tom, when you said you went homeless, you had nothing but your ID, right? And without that ID, you end up being prevented from accessing a lot of things that you need, right? You can't get into shelters, you can't get into, any sort of proper health care, you can't get employment, of course, right? All those things that are necessary to get you back on your feet. I was talking with an individual today, and I said, how did you lose your documents? And he said, well, I was moving. I moved from California to Florida, lost everything, and now it's, it takes, I think for us, it took about 6 months to get these documents back. That's a long time. He said, I wasn't homeless before that, but give it enough time without being able to get a job, and you don't stand a chance, right? And so a lot of individuals either find themselves without housing because they lose their identification documents, or they've lost their identification documents and it's preventing them from obtaining housing, right? Because you can't even get an apartment without an ID, but you also can't get a job to pay for said apartment, right? And so for us, that's one of the challenges of homelessness. It's super complex, right? There's not one simple challenge that is like, if we fix this one thing, everything will be better, right? But from our perspective, identification is just something that is overlooked because you don't experience the pain unless you've actually been without ID. But it's also just something that's so basic that you don't even really think about it being a need, right? Because you haven't experienced it.
For education, we also count in hotels, we count in shared housing. We also count in inadequate housing. So we have quite a few families who are living in homes with a mortgage, but their roof was torn off and they can't afford to fix it because maybe there was a gap in insurance or whatever. Many people who are living in an RV in their home, leasing out garages or sheds that wouldn't be adequate settings. So all of those families count. We have almost 7,000 students identified in the district, but coming back to the affordable wage piece, we know that there's got to be thousands more. that aren't identified that are in those situations, just because knowing, I think right now in order to get a 2-bedroom apartment, it's somewhere around $28 an hour we have to be making. And it's almost like I think 52,000 is it, that's just around 52,000 a year. People are making that. So I think the challenge that I would say that we see most often is one, just knowledge of what your rights are, what the resources are, and available things that are out there. Even as a person who's worked in handling the same role for 5 years, every day I learn about a new resource or a new resource. And so imagine being an individual trying to figure out all that right when you need it. But then also that brings in the access piece. It is so hard. It takes 6 months to get your documents back. They walk into a school, and as much as we're trying to give them the right of immediate enrollment, which is something they're entitled to, if they don't have those documents, 9 times out of 10, those kids get turned away because they don't want to talk about their housing situation and say, this is what I'm feeling this right now, because they don't know their rights. So it's this back and forth access and knowledge piece that I constantly see with our families struggling with this. We hate the word homeless because the moment we say homeless, then everybody puts this stigma of a panhandler standing on the street. And how could anybody be, they must not have a job, they must not be working, they must not be trying, and this stigma that people have about it. When in reality, 99% of the families we meet do have jobs, they are working, they're trying to get out of their situation, just need to know. So I think that stigma piece is like this waterfall effect of like it impacts their ability to identify, to know about what is out there, and then ultimately it impacts from public administration, the identification to get the funding, more grants from other organizations, because the more they service, same thing, they get more money, but it doesn't look like there's as many as we're servicing.
I just wanted to say one thing while I was thinking of it as you were speaking. One of the things about having a good public awareness education campaign as your number one thing is that you have to get the public's mindset changed. You know, the federal government only gives us grant dollars for actual boxes of people. You know, in other words, you have to do this for these people. There's no latitude for communities or service organizations how those dollars get spent. Whereas if you have a good public awareness campaign and you're raising more public funds, those funds are available to use how the city sees fit or how that organization sees fit. So that's why I just wanted to tie that piece back.
So that's some of this resources, especially for nonprofits fighting to get down. Yeah. One way is to send nonprofits work together to maximize the dollars. So it's like homeless some organizations, education, how to get back what you're saying. I'll just throw out, on our side, we do both showers and provide showers for kids. But a lot of times where we're going, we'll work with other agencies, and so they have wraparound services. So when we pull in our shower unit, they also get haircuts or IDs or clothing or food. So that's one of the ways where, a lot of times you are competing, but really you're doing separate things. And it makes sense, when there are groups of homeless that you can bring those groups together and provide more than one service at a time. So that's one of the ways.
We developed a need, like the shelter that shut down in Yukon. They needed to put places. I come out, we've seen out there that Friday morning, they processed. The issue was that the individuals that were homesick, they didn't necessarily get mental sex partial. They wanted to see doctors and we kind of opened it didn't register with them. But now they're ready to come. So, yeah,
More questions from the audience, please.
Yes, sir. Having served with the homeless and help them through the process of getting their identity, getting social security, having walked that walk. Once you get to that point, even if they're to a point where they can afford something, physically go to the said landlord and say, yeah, well, where do you live for the last 2 months? Unfortunately, homeless. How do you get around that? Because the minute they say homeless, you're absolutely right. They're done. No discussion, nothing. No matter how much money you prove, when that word homeless comes out, it's the only truthful word a person can say when you're asking where'd you live for the last 6 months. How do you get around that? I'm a big part of a lot of these things and landlords to assist with that conversation and that transition. But a larger scale evicted recipients. I mean, once we get them situated, they're not motivated. So now I feel like they need longer monitoring. Yes, you can get to that house, yes, you can get in place, but now that they're sitting there, we didn't teach them any ADL skills, we didn't teach them any skill building, interviews, all that. So this person is sitting in that empty house doing nothing. And now they're back in our shelter 2 months later. They didn't get
Cool.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I have to say that, personally watching people through this walk, getting them into their house, and then watching them fall back into homelessness. Tim and I have had a lot of experience with that. So here's the thing. People don't understand that when people get into a survival mode, they are so poor and destitute. I think it's unreasonable to expect them to be honest. I think it's unreasonable to expect them to fit in with society's norms because they're in the middle of a ton of trauma. And so one of the things that I do is I give speeches at a nursing college for the nurses who are working in emergency room. Because understanding that people in a survival mode have a complete different mindset. They can't plan. They literally, it's psychologically, they cannot plan. It's not something I'm just saying, it's a medical fact. They live day to day in homeless conditions. So having and understanding, trauma-informed care and how to reach those people, exactly what you said. We put people, we get them all the way to a house, but there's no services after that to help them learn how to be housed. And after living on the streets for 8 or 10 years, you just can't jump back into that life. So we have a lot of service shortfalls because there's all these silos based on grants. That's really what I see.
And I would say though that our community and the community organizations that are working with these individuals, I mean, you hit the nail on the head where it's not, you can't just throw somebody into a new situation and hope they swim, right? And so that just is the importance of, as a community, whether it's the agency that's doing the case management leading up to it, it's the agency doing the case management from housing on, or it's the community of us around them, right? Whether it's neighbors or whatever, building people into community, because when you feel at home, you're gonna feel safer, right? You're going to find that that's the place you want to be. But if you house somebody and they don't have any choices to where they go and you just plop them in an apartment, that's not home, that's not your community, that's not where you feel comfortable, and so I think it's just really indicative of the importance, and I do believe our community is looking at that whole situation. We're not just dropping people in and saying, all right, good job, and yes, those situations can happen, and of course, there's always recidivism, there's always going to be struggles with that, but that acknowledgement, and I'm so grateful we're in a community that is taking a look at how do we circle around this individual from day one in the shelter all the way to housing and beyond, because that's essential.
Which is kind of building up on what everyone said, but in the sense of, I do think to change the image of what homelessness is, we have to do the public relations, and we have to show that somebody who meets that definition is not what people think. And then I think on the second hand of it, that navigation piece, I know we're trying a program in Orange County with a few feeder patterns called Hearts, where we're looking to have our social workers navigate a family that might be in that situation. But really, call the agencies for them. And we've tried out some mini trials with some of our unaccompanied youth this past year, just looking at going through the matrix and seeing what they need. I can share one story of a student that he tells me, tell my story everywhere. But he, at age 16, he was in a house with his father and siblings, and a tree fell on the house, and they came and said it was no longer livable. The fire department asked him if they had anywhere to go. Dad says, yes, we do. And so he leaves, but then after the fire department leaves, Dad tells him that we have a place to go, but there's no room for you, so you're going to need to stay here. So at age 16, he just knew that he didn't want to get sent to a group home, and he didn't want to tell anybody. So for 2 years straight, he picked up odd jobs and walked himself down to the library every single day. He had enrolled himself into Orange County virtual schools, so it was easy for him to not show up at campus, and he just did his work every day down at the library and pulled up food whenever he could for 2 straight years. At age 18, he hit that age and he finally told the assistant principal at the school, and they called their office. That student graduated last year with a 4.8 GPA and his AA degree. All just for his own perseverance. But what ended up happening, and a lot of you are students in the room can understand, he didn't understand what the college system was and how he needed to handle his direct connect to go from Valencia to UCF. So he thought, I can't do anything until I actually graduate, get a full transcript. He didn't talk to anyone about any of this. He didn't fill out a FAFSA until we learned about him in February. And so all of those things that he missed out on caused him to, he got a decline letter from UCF publicly, even with all of that. But it turned out because he filled out the wrong application. He didn't know. And so all these things had happened to him. So we were excited because he did get his acceptance, so he'll be a UCF student in the spring. But it's all of those things for them. But he graduated last year. He still calls me. I'm still his quote-unquote navigator. When he got his decline letter, he was like, I don't know what to do. Who do I call? How do I do the FAFSA again? How do I do all these things? And I think having a point person that somebody trusts, your case manager starts to be that, but I think, I know I've been in some of the training sessions like Diversion and building that trust with your case manager. Sometimes there's just not the time and the numbers to do that. And how do we start to give navigators that don't have to necessarily be like pull out social workers, but a person for somebody to talk to and help outreach for them. So.
The face of this. Yeah, but that face, then say, look, it's sitting out more families. What kind of unique challenges that can you argue?
My follow-up question to you would be: is there actually more families being unhoused, or are we doing a better job about identifying it?
So I think I have a mixed answer to that because of my definition for homelessness, right? So if I'm looking at our literal homeless, it's a very small percentage of our 7,000 students. I will say from that point, most of the families that we learn of come from the shelter, from the coalition, or people who identify through that route. We get very few families who just call and say, hey, I'm losing my car, can you help me? And we navigate them the other way around. A lot of that is because families don't want to tell the school because they're afraid that somebody's going to come take their kids away. So that's a big piece on the literal end for us. On the other end of it, though, I think there are so many people that are one paycheck away, one family member getting sick away, that are in shared housing or renting. I can't tell you how many families we got calls from this year. I have to have somebody come move into the bedroom. We now have 10 people in a 2-bedroom because my rent went up $600. And so they can't even leave that place to go to a cheaper place because originally you have to make the 3 times the amount. So even if they went somewhere cheaper and it was slightly less, they're still not going to be able to qualify to get in, and then they'll be out on the streets. And so I feel like we have family after family that is that situation with the kids living in those places. That's why we end up with the hotels that you mentioned. Hotels turn to apartments, which still qualify for our program. And then they walk in and say, I have a decent mortgage, but it's a 200 square foot. Right. That's not an adequate place for families.
Yes, sir.
So the big problem here is we keep throwing out the word homeless.
Yeah.
So what does homeless mean? So for you, homeless means a completely different thing than if we really talk about the homeless. Because are we talking chronically homeless? Are we talking transitional homeless? Because her bucket of people is a very small bucket in a huge bucket of reality. Okay? So when she's talking about family homelessness, that's all how that's handled, all the problems that come with it are completely different than, for example, the chronically homeless who have been on the streets for many, many years, who require a lot more of it to get stabilized, and there's so much of the mental illness and all of that. So I hope that the big key is to get anything accomplished anywhere. You really have to change hearts before you can change minds with your information. So it's really, really important that the public knows the difference between these kinds of people. Because when you talk about homeless, the public has this impression of the person panhandling that's substance addicted. That's not really the reality. So getting that information out in public education and really getting the public behind you and making the public educated is, I think, one of the key first steps that really nobody's doing a good job of. We did, for a while here in the city of Orlando, do a great job of that. I mean, an amazing job. And tons of money was raised and we got the publics, but that's something that it's really hard to keep going on a constant basis at that level. Matter of fact, it's almost impossible, is what I'm trying to say. But that is what it takes, is getting the community engaged and involved, and the government pushing for a solution, not deciding the solution, letting the experts know, what they expect. These are what your goals are, but letting them figure out how to do it. But the education and public awareness piece is so crucial and not really put where it needs to be.
I'm certainly a proponent of positive information, PR. That's one of the 19 tools of government. Is Smoky Bear. Look how successful that campaign was. Instead of having government do everything, it's like enlist the support of everybody. Only you can prevent all fires or whatever. So obviously the PR piece. But then you also, I see a theme emerging here, sustainability. Like you just talked about honest. We did great for a while, but it's hard to keep up that level of commitment to and the other problem was to to the families or to the veterans or to whatever. And so what do you see? I mean, forgive my ignorance in this regard. I mean, do we have like a homeless czar or something like that here that's one overarching person, or is it just kind of a hodgepodge of hopefully we all work together? Or?
Well, some people would say we don't need a homeless czar. I would disagree with that. I would say Andre Bailey was about as close to a homeless czar as we've had, and he really engaged the city. He got the sports teams involved. He got big business involved. Lots of money came in. And the bright side of that is it could be spent any way that we needed. The big problem that we have is the government gives these grants out to organizations, and they have so many ties. It ties the organization's hands from doing what they even really want to do in some cases, and I'll let them speak on that if it's accurate or not, but I feel it is based on my experience. The big key is getting money that you can use in an effective way without all these strings, and so to do that, you have to raise public dollars. And that's the only way you can do it. They can't do it through grants because you're going to do X, Y, and Z, or you're not going to get the grant.
I'll touch on that in the sense that Clean the World was started as a 501c3 charity, and very quickly thought they would get all these grants and all that, and it wasn't happening. So very quickly switched to a social enterprise, a B corporation, where we do the dollars we bring in, we can decide how best to spend them for the best usage as opposed to being restricted. So we do have a charity side of our business also, but the social enterprise side does not have those restrictions. And so we work with government, we work with corporations, we work with all kinds of different companies to bring in the dollars that we need to do the service we provide.
Here's the big thing, without somebody that the community and the government leaders see as the person, the point person on homelessness, you have many organizations that they're all trying to, for example, iDignity, what a great service. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, when I was homeless in Orlando, I watched go to iDignity and what they do. And I could go on, I stayed at the Coalition for the Homeless right after it opened. As a matter of fact, it opened 2 days when I was living homeless in Orlando, and I literally stayed there. So what these organizations do is great, but the problem is that these organizations, well, let me say it this way. A nonprofit is nothing more than a business with a different tax code. People don't realize that, you know. Lots of nonprofit leaders would love to go do this, but they don't have the dollars to do it, but they're not being paid to do that, so they can't extend that far. And so that's one of the big issues we have within the system. But the big key is just having somebody that's seeing everything that's happening, like the Continuum of Care does. You know, the Homeless Services Network here is the ones that are seeing what's happening overall. So the community don't know who that point person is, and you don't have that huge level of engagement that we used to have in the Rethink Homeless days, you know, that kind of thing. It's very difficult because how to get the dollars and how to distribute the dollars becomes a huge issue without that point person.
Let me say that on time that you spoke of Andre. He was very, very public. He was very, very public to the point of almost too public. But he got that recognition that you're talking about. And it's going to take that kind of publicity to get us back to a point where we have the dollars to spend like it needs to be spent. But it's going to take somebody just like to stand up and say, I'm the man, I'm the one that's going to do this. We'll make sure money's flowing, and I'll be the face, but we don't have to face it.
See, and I would take a different approach. I think there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. You know, there's the glory of the public relations campaign of look at all this stuff, look at, you know. But when that all dies down, because eventually public relations, there's highs and lows, right? You're right. You can't just stay, yay, this is the thing we're gonna hear about for now and forevermore. But there's the people who have continued to work, right? There's the people at the shelters, the team of social workers, the team of case managers who continue to do this tirelessly. And I think that even if there's not one person, I mean, there is a wonderful, wonderful leader at Homeless Services Network who's in that agency, it's running that, or the central agency to Continuum of Care. But you have different leadership styles, right? And there's so much going on right now that is still pulling in funds and still raising awareness, just in different ways, right? Just recently, the Secretary of HUD had come by and surprised the community with a huge amount of money because of the work we've been doing with youth homelessness, right? And so I think that there are different phases that a community goes through in figuring out how to handle homelessness, and part of it is leadership styles, right? That there's a lot going on, and the importance of a lead agency like that, and the importance of the Continuum of Care does allow organizations like iDignity to say, okay, we're going to do this one thing, right? We're going to focus on identification, and then the coalition can focus on the housing piece and the overnight stays, and then they don't have to worry about the identification piece because we're going to work on that, right? But we aren't going to handle overnight stays because I would be horrible at that. We have a building that's like 500 square feet. We don't even have space, right? And so because we can collaborate, because we have that centralized communication between the agencies, that's what allows us to be effective as well, because we can each handle the pieces that we become experts at.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I see happening to us, and as one, we're so large, not just geographically, but like just the number of people we're trying to serve, and then which people, to your point, do we serve? And so I think it would be beneficial in a sense to have a point person to bring everybody's thoughts to say, we can serve this group of people, and this is how many we can serve, and so on. Because what's happening is, from a standpoint of somebody who provides referrals, you know, we say call 211 and we get eye rolls because everything's at capacity. It doesn't mean that those people aren't doing great things or that they're not servicing thousands of people, but we have tens of thousands of people who need supports, and in various different categories with various different needs. And I think it's almost breaking those down to like do the categories and then outline where our agencies are to say who can service this in this smaller area. You know, iDignity might be able to get somebody else on the East End that could service just a few hundred people, and then we could do something similar. But maybe the people on the East End don't even realize it's a need, you know, and or that could even be done. And I think those are the kind of conversations that maybe not even a point person, but I think bringing a few point people together to kind of bring them in, because we only come in with the knowledge we have at that moment. And I think, again, to your point of leadership styles, I see a lot of leaders doing this work that are doing great work, but they're coming in only with the knowledge that they have from their own personal experiences. And that makes it harder for us to hit the tens of thousands of people that we're trying to serve.